Now, am I using that rhetorical question with Karen absolutely shut down communication? That's no way to communicate. There's no correct answer to that question. And it's extremely intimidating. In other words, we only use rhetorical questions with adults when we're trying to hurt their feelings, but we use them with kids all the time. You know what I've always thought? If you want to break a teacher of using rhetorical questions, assign them a child who answers rhetorical questions. How many times am I supposed to tell you to keep your hands to yourself? Kid says 14. 14. What am I supposed to do with you? How about a weekend at Disney World? That'd be nice. If they answered rhetorical questions, we wouldn't use them as often. But it's a weapon we use against kids all the time. And I'm not sure that we should. Debbie.
All the children thought that was just the thing to do.
Karen.
Betsy, put the corn in two big pans to put in the oven.
Okay, wasn't that fun? How are you feeling right now? Okay, and again, let me throw some questions at you. Whose idea was it to put the corn in the oven? Who knows? Why couldn't they use the popper? Whose idea was it to sweep it up off the floor? See, nobody really knows. Even though you read that material, you went through that material, you don't have any idea what the content was. Because all of your energy went into the decoding of the material. And yet I see many teachers who get ecstatic because they've got a child who's in the 4th grade, who's reading in the 4th grade, and they push him through a 6th grade textbook. But if the child might be decoding it, but not actually reading it and understanding it. And therefore, we're not doing the child any favor to put him through that experience. This activity is dedicated to that kid, and I've seen him thousands of times, that will go up to a teacher and say, "Excuse me, teacher, I don't know how to do this worksheet." The teacher says, "The directions are right there, read them." "Yeah, I read them, but I don't know how to do it." "The directions are right there, read them." "I read it, but I don't know how to do it." "They're right there. I read it, but I don't know how to do it." And the teacher finally says, "It says circle the right answer." And the kid says, "Okay, no problem." In other words, once I heard it, I'm fine, but I've got to hear it first. I've got to hear it before it makes any sense to me. But now you've got to get a chance to see what it's like to be an auditory learner, because here's what I want you to do. When I say go, I want you to turn to the last page in the booklet. Okay. You already know those stories, so you don't have to read the whole thing, I'm sure. All right, everybody look up here. Did you like those stories?
Sure.
Rita, what month did you think of when you read this story?
No idea.
What month, Rita? Give me a month.
March.
Not March, no. Why would you think of March? What about you, Tom? What month?
December.
Why would you think of December? Ann, what month? Take a guess, Ann. Take a guess.
June.
Not June. Are you guessing, Ann? For crying out, it's not June. Karen.
March.
Debbie.
January.
Car.
February.
February.
Hit 'em up.
Car, stand up and tell them why.
It's the only one left.
Okay. Now I'm going to read you this story, and you're going to get it through your ears for the first time, through your favorite modality, and you'll be able to understand it. Here we go. Story number 1. Once upon a time, when the father of our country was a little boy, he was walking on his papa's farm as a widow hatchet. What's the story about?
George Washington.
We'll start again. Then his papa came strolling by. "Jesus Christ," said he. "How's been chopping down my cherry tree?" "Don't bust the guts," said his son George. "I cannot tell a lie. I did it with a ratchet." Then his father lost his temper and took a swish and pat a little judge till his canvas sore. And the moral of the story is, don't chop down cherry trees. Again, we could have sat here and I could have had you read that story over and over and over, and until I gave you some auditory input, it wouldn't have made any sense. That's why it is important that some kids have their books put on tape, so that they can get the information through their ears. They can understand it that way. They can't understand it when they get it through their eyes. We're not going to be able to be effective as parents and teachers with the LD child unless we understand the critical value of fairness. And before we talk about it, we have to take a little bit of a backtrack, talk about the work of a gentleman named Lawrence Kohlberg. Lawrence Kohlberg was a Harvard educator and scientist, and he taught us pretty much everything we know about moral development in children. And he taught us basically two things. One is that kids learn their morals according to what they see us do, not according to what we tell them to do. My 12-year-old son, Kit, suppose I wanted to teach him the value of honesty. So I sit down with Kit on Monday night and I tell him about Abraham Lincoln. And how Lincoln took a book by mistake and carried it to the woods of Kentucky 12 miles back to its rightful owner. Tuesday night I tell him about George Washington. George Washington chopped down the cherry tree and said, I cannot tell a lie. Wednesday night I read to him from the Bible about honesty. Thursday night I read to him from the Quran about honesty. Friday night we do an hour and a half of honesty role playing. 5.5 hours of intensive honesty curriculum as only an elementary school teacher can do it, right? We have film strips, we take a field trip to the Honesty Museum, to the basement of the Watergate building in Washington. 5.5 hours of intensive honesty curriculum, and then on Saturday night I take Christian to the movies. Kit and I get up to the booth to buy the tickets, and I bend over and whisper into his 12-year-old ear, tell the man you're 10. Tell him you're 10. Understand, Kit learned more about honesty in that 5-second exchange at the theater than he did in 5.5 hours of lecture. Because kids learn their morals according to what they see, not according to what we tell them to do. And the second thing Kohlberg taught us is that morals do indeed develop. We've got to keep that in mind as we talk about the critical moral value of fairness. Because as I speak to parents and teachers all over this country, I see classrooms and families being run based on the adult's concept of honesty, the adult's concept of truth, the adult's concept of liberty, patriotism, religion, and yet those same families and classrooms are being run based on the child's concept of fairness. What I'd like you to do when the session is over tonight is go home, go up into your attic, pull down your old philosophy books from high school or college, or even take out a Webster's dictionary and look up the definition of fairness. Fairness does not mean that everyone gets the same. Fairness actually means that everyone gets what he or she needs. And yet still, I'll deal with teachers where I'll say to a teacher, Jody's going to be in your class next semester, teacher. She's a wonderful kid, very bright kid. She's going to do very well in your math class. But she's got a learning disability, and it's called a far-point copying problem, and she can't copy off the blackboard. So here's what I'd like you to do. When you put problems on the blackboard for everyone to copy, I'd like you to write up an extra set for Jody and give that to Jody. And if that doesn't work, you don't have time for that, Lee's pretty quick. Maybe Lee could write up 2 sets and then hand one across to Jody, or even put a piece of carbon paper on the Lee's sheet so when she writes up one set of problems as an extra one automatically to give to Jody. I'd like you to do that, please. Invariably, the teacher will say, I can't do that. And I say, why not? There's a lot of answers I'll accept. I'll accept because I don't know how. I'll accept because I don't have time. I'll accept because I don't believe in mainstreaming. I'll accept because I don't like Jody. I will go to the mat with a teacher and I will discuss any one of those answers with a teacher. The one answer I will not discuss, the one answer that I think is beneath contempt and beneath discussing, is the answer I hear most often. And that is, I can't do that for Jody. Why? It's not fair to the others. It's got nothing to do with the others. Jody needs it, the others don't. It has nothing to do with the others. Let's take it and try it in an adult situation. Suppose I'm up here lecturing. In the middle of my lecture, God forbid, in the middle of my lecture, Carolyn here falls off her chair. I look down at her, she's turning blue, cardiac arrest. God forbid she's having a heart attack right in front of us. And I'm trained in CPR techniques, so I know what to do. How ludicrous, how unfair, how absolutely foolish and unethical would it be for me to say, hey, Carolyn, I'd like to help you, I really would. But heck, we've got 30 people here. I haven't got time to give CPR to everybody, and it wouldn't be fair to only give it to you. But the teacher who says, I can't help the LD child because it's not fair to the others, is working at the same moral level as a 10-year-old child. And this is particularly important for you as parents to understand. Because I know a lot of parents of special needs kids who spend full time beating themselves up and trying to keep the scales balanced. What do? Johnny, the LD child, needs a special tutor. How do I make that up to the other kids so that I'm fair to everybody? You don't have to. As long as you can look in the eyes of the siblings and say, honey, if it was you, I'd be doing the same thing. Fairness does not mean that everyone gets the same. Fairness means that everyone gets what he or she needs. And we're not going to be able to work successfully with the child, mainstream child, learning disabled child in the mainstream classroom until teachers and parents begin to understand that in order to be fair, we've got to treat them differently.
Don't want to do.
Listen to the comments of some of the survivors of this Fat City workshop that we videotaped.
I mean, I really had a headache, like right here. And I said, I don't want all these people to think that I'm stupid, you know? And then I said, God, imagine kids with learning disabilities who must sit in class all the time saying, all of these people think I'm really stupid. And I mean, I know I'm not stupid.
As anxiety producing as it was, I can deal with it here because I know the situation. I know that everybody around me is making mistakes. But if something like this had happened to me when, you know, I was a child and I was very sensitive, I would have been devastated.
These kids are going through such a crisis, like, oh my God, if my friends think I'm stupid, I'm ruined. And basically at that age, they are. Because, you know, their kids are like, oh, this person's stupid, he doesn't know anything, and I don't want him to play with me this recess. And that's devastating to a kid at that age.
I think it would be a good experience for a lot of other children in classrooms at some point to understand what their friends and their classmates are going through. Maybe if they had to read a backwards passage or couldn't see the cow, it might help them to better understand why Johnny has to go see, you know, the specialist for a few hours, or why he gets that extra attention. That same thing about fairness.
It's really important to have the sister or the brother of the LD child to understand that he's not stupid, he's not backwards, it's just that he has to learn in a different way.
I think it really expresses how it is for me in a classroom, and it shows everyone else how it is, because I know a lot of my friends, like, I'll sit in the class and I'll be reading something, and they'll just start making fun of me because it takes me either a long time to figure out what the words are, or I read them backwards and it doesn't make sense to them, but it really doesn't make sense to me either.
This has mostly dealt with in what the classroom is like. But if you think about it, like if you just go out in the world and you go and look around, I just think how frustrating it would be if you go out and you look at something, like you're walking down the street, you see something you want to read, and you can't understand it.
The problem that I see that my child has had, and I think most learning disability kids suffer from, is a poor self-esteem, which can be so offset by the teachers in the school if they are enlightened about what they're doing. So that, to me, is the exciting, potential that this program would offer, because they suffer so in terms of how they perceive themselves.
It's so frustrating for the teacher who doesn't understand what's going on. Teachers, when they say, look at me when you're talking to me, and they throw their catchphrases out. These catchphrases, they don't understand what's happening to the child. They're not doing it to be malicious. They need the information.
Work with thousands of parents each year through our association. And the thing that I hear the most is their frustration, anxiety, and tension in dealing with not only the child, but the school system. The professionals in their lives don't really understand the emotional baggage that the parent brings to every meeting and every conference, through living with this child.
When I think of the torture I put my first learning disabled child through when she was learning to read, of saying so on and on, cat, thinking that eventually this would become cat, and it never became cat, and I would be so frustrated with it.
We accentuate the positive in our house. We don't dwell on that which you cannot do. We dwell on that which you can do and encourage them to do it even better.
Earth the Carol, come in, please.
Well, Nancy's better than I am, because I can't think.
Did you write this to be funny?
You're picking on me.
Come on, Nancy, quickly. Everybody's waiting.
I can't read it. Something.
No?
That's it.
Was
That's
what?
all I can do.
Okay.
I got it. Hold on a second.
There were 3 letters in the word, Carol. How difficult can this be?
Very difficult. I don't know.
The entire video has a fairly modest and yet fairly ambitious goal, which is to get people to be sensitized, to understand, to empathize, not to sympathize. These kids don't need our sympathy, they need our empathy. The genesis of the video, I think, explains the impact of the video. It was born of frustration, literally of frustration. Something that happened to me very early in my career, my first year as a teacher. I was working with a young boy named Craig. Craig was 14 years old. He attended a school where I was working as a tutor in the mountains of Massachusetts. It was a residential school. Craig was 14 years old. He was a great kid, severe learning problems, severe writing and reading problems, terrific athletic kid, kind of kid that anybody would enjoy working with. And I had him for 40 minutes a day in a composition class. My job was to teach him how to write. And one day at the end of class, I gave him a piece of composition paper. And I said, take this back to your dormitory for me, Craig, and write a story for me about your dog. So he dutifully took the paper back, went to his dormitory, wrote a story about his dog, brought it, gave it to me the next day. I put it in my briefcase, took it home that evening, had a little dinner, popped the briefcase, took out the composition, took out my red pencil. I don't own a red pencil anymore. We had a lot of red pencils in. And I started making the corrections and corrected every punctuation error, every spelling error, every error on the page I caught. Nothing got past me. Put the paper back in my briefcase, went off to class the next day. I came into class and Craig was actually waiting for me. Now this is very unusual. He was often late, sometimes on time, but never ever early. And I walked into the room and he came running up to me and he said, "Did you read my composition last night, Mr. Lavoie? Did you get a chance to read it?" I said, "Yes, I did." I said, it was very good. It reminded me of my dog when I was a kid and all the things you try to say to soften the blow. And so I sat down, I said, "We've got to talk about the mistakes you made, Craig." And I sat down next to him and I took the composition out, and now he's seeing it for the first time since I got my hands on it. And there was more of my writing on the paper, frankly, than there was his. And I started going over the corrections line by line, and I turned to say something to him, and there was a tear running down the side of his nose. Now, I'd known Craig for 2 years. I'd never seen him cry. I'd seen him in all kinds of trouble. I'd seen him hurt on the athletic field. I'd never seen him cry. So I realized that I'd really hit a nerve. So I had the wisdom to put the paper aside, and I turned to him and I said, "Craig, what's the problem?" And he said, "Mr. Lavoie, it's just so frustrating." He said, "I know those are real mistakes on that page, and I know it's your job to correct those mistakes. But the night before last, after study hall, all the kids went up to the gym to play basketball, and I stayed in for an extra half hour just to proofread this. I thought it was perfect, and I couldn't wait to give it to you, and I couldn't wait to get it back from you today. And it's just so frustrating." And I turned to Craig and I put my hands on his shoulders and looked into his eyes and said the dumbest thing I've ever said to a kid with a learning disability, and I've never said it since. I looked at him and I said, "Craig, I know how you feel." And he stood up and he pointed at me and he said, "The devil you do. You don't have any idea what this feels like. Tell me you feel badly for me. Tell me you'll help me, but don't tell me you know what this feels like, because you don't have idea one what this feels like." And he stormed out of the classroom. And a great insight came to me that day, an insight about me and an insight about my colleagues in education. The insight that came to me about me is that I realized that day, I will never know what they feel like. I mean, I worked residential special ed for over 30 years, waking kids up in the morning and putting them to bed at night. I still don't know what it must be like to be unable to deal with language. And so I decided to put together a workshop just for our teaching staff that would simulate what it was like to have a learning disability. So we put this workshop together. Ironically, the group of us teachers had gone out to see a movie, a Stacy Keach movie called F.A.T. City that was the evening before. So when I did the workshop, I said, we're going to do F.A.T. City again, except this time F.A.T. is going to be frustration, anxiety, and tension. That's where the name came from that long-forgotten movie. And I did it just with the staff at our school, and then it caught on regionally, and then the story of the video. So the response of people is that most of the people in the audience on the video, and I did the workshop live for years, most of the people in the audience never had any idea what it was like to fail in school, to be unable to answer a question, to not be the brightest kid in the class, to have a teacher standing there and telling you you're not trying hard enough when indeed you're trying as hard as you can, to have the other students laugh at you because of your incompetence. That's a feeling that most of those people have never had. And that aha moment that you talked about, that's when they recognize that it is possible to be trying as hard as you can to do something that's seemingly very simple, and yet be unable to do it. And it's an experience that most of them hadn't had. Some of the impact on individuals has been extraordinarily humbling for me. I was at an airport in St. Louis and waiting for a plane. And of course I work for nonprofits, so you're always in the back of the plane. And I went to get my ticket, and they gave me a first class ticket. And I sat down and realized it was first class, so I had this moral dilemma, do I go tell them or do I get embarrassed in the plane when they throw me back in stowage? And so I went up to the desk and I said, "Excuse me, you've made a mistake on the ticket." And they said, "No, you were given an upgrade by Mr. Smith." And I said, "Well, I don't know Mr. Smith." And they said, "Well, he works for the airline and he gave you an upgrade to first class." So I'm not completely foolish, and so I accepted that. About 10 minutes before the flight, this gentleman came over from the airline, Mr. Smith, and he introduced himself. And he said, "I saw you sitting there." He said, "and I recognized you." He said, "So I moved you into first class." He said, "Our family was a mess. Our son has learning problems, and our family was a mess. We're on the verge of a divorce, and it was all around the child, that my wife and I just could not agree on how we should deal with this child. And I went out to my car one day, and the videotape was on the front seat of my car with a note from my son saying, 'Dad, please watch this.'" He said, "And during my lunch hour, I went into somebody's office and put it in the VCR and watched it." He said, "And it completely changed the way I view my son." I think the greatest compliment that the Fat City has ever received in all the years it's been out, and I've got a file drawer filled with letters and nice things that people have sent. I got a phone call from Cleveland just a couple of weeks ago from an organization that trains bank tellers. And they said, "Can we use the video to train our bank tellers?" And I said, "Well, God bless, but why? It's got nothing to do with working in a bank." And the person said, "No, it's got to do with good human relations. That's really what it's about, is the way folks ought to treat each other." And that meant a great deal to me, because all of my work, that's the goal of my work, is to treat children with the same respect that you would treat adults. And in that video, there are many, many times that I talk to people with great disrespect. And that's the way, unfortunately, many of our kids are handled, because of the frustration the parents and teachers feel about our kids. The video was produced again in 1988. There's been an explosion of research since then. It's been estimated that about 90% of what we know, for instance, about attention deficit disorder, we've learned in the last 5 years. In watching the video again in preparation for this interview, I was afraid I would wince and say, "Oh, why did I say that? We don't believe in that anymore." There really weren't any times that I did. The only times I winced a little bit were in terms of the definition, and in terms of there's a big movement in special education now called People First, where we refer to these students not as learning disabled students, but students with learning disabilities. It's a little bit of political correctness, and frankly, I get a little bit impatient with it sometimes. People think it's going to change the world. It's not. But as much as possible now, we try to refer to the children as children with learning disabilities. In the video throughout, I refer to them as learning disabled kids. And that is a little bit more than political correctness, because I ran a school for adolescents with learning disabilities. And my first day there, I said to the staff, "This school for 30 years, has dealt with learning disabled adolescents. We're not going to do that anymore. We're going to deal with adolescents with learning disabilities." In other words, they're teenagers first. They ought to have a prom. They ought to have dances. They ought to have sports. They ought to have a yearbook. They ought to have all the things that adolescents have. So they're adolescents first. They shouldn't have to sacrifice their adolescence at the altar of the learning disability. And so I wish in the video that I had done People First a little bit more, but it wasn't in our consciousness then. In terms of the definition I give in the video is a very unscientific definition. And candidly, we're not much beyond that now. the definition I use is a definition of exclusion. I talk about what the child is not rather than what the child is. The child is not succeeding in school, and yet he's not mentally impaired, he's not emotionally disturbed, his modalities are intact, and on and on and on. The two things that have changed about that a little bit is we're recognizing more and more now that children can be multiply handicapped. It has the unfortunate term in our field of comorbidity, that it's possible for a child to have a mental impairment and a learning disability. It's possible. I did some work at Gallaudet University about children who are deaf and have learning disabilities. So the definition is changing in that we're not being as exclusionary anymore. It's very possible for a child who's mentally impaired to also have a learning disability. But we're so multidisciplinary in this field. I mean, ophthalmologists are interested in our field, pediatricians are interested in our field, educators are interested in our field, and every time one of those constituencies comes up with a definition of learning disabilities, the other constituency says, no, that's not good enough for us. So I don't think we'll ever have a definition of learning disabilities everyone's happy with. The definition in New York is different than the one in Connecticut. Connecticut's different from Massachusetts. There is a federal